What if I told you that the order we do things directly impacts how much we can get done in a day? For most of my life, I flew by the seat of my pants, only dealing with tasks as they came up. In school, my motto was, if it's due tomorrow, I'm gonna do it tomorrow. I was living reactively. And the crazy part? It was working. That is until I got my first job out of college. When I was a civil engineer, I had to work on multiple client projects with different deadlines. I didn't have a system, and I mainly worked on whatever project was yelling the loudest because that definitely meant that their work needed to be done first. While I thought I was pretty productive, I still felt pretty burnt out at the end of most days. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that I learned that the loudest tasks usually aren't the most important ones. The system that I accidentally kind of stumbled upon comes from a quote from President Eisenhower in 1954 when he said, "I have two kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent are not important and the important are never urgent." Learning to balance these two ideas of urgency and importance is also kind of just figuring out what the priority of your work is. Whatever you're working on right now is by definition your highest priority item. The fastest way to improve your productivity is to learn to prioritize better. Prioritizing matters because every single task on our mental or literal to-do list competes for attention and energy, both of which are extremely limited resources. But where do you start? Like, how do you know what to prioritize? Well, it starts with defining what do we mean by important and what do we mean by urgent. Urgent items always feel like they're the most important, but urgency is actually based on only one thing, the deadline. Items with closer deadlines are more urgent than other items, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're more important. But that raises the question, what's important if it's not related to the deadline? The best way I've learned to think about important items is how valuable is this thing to me if I finish it, or how damaging is it to me if I don't do it? Thought about another way is how aligned is this task with my current goals? For example, if a fire breaks out in our house, that's both urgent and important. We desire to stay alive and we only have so much time to get out of the house before something bad happens. If we have a weekly meeting starting in 2 minutes, that's urgent, but probably not important since most meetings don't live up to the promise of their value anyways. Or maybe we get distracted by our television or phones. That's not important and it's not urgent. But what about items that are important but not urgent? Like, what does that look like? Well, these are things like weekly planning, learning, leadership development, and networking. They don't have an immediate deadline, and completing them usually comes with huge benefits. Experts say that we usually grow the most when we spend most of our time working on items that are important but not urgent. And if this feels like a lot to remember, there's actually this really popular and insanely simple to use tool based on the president's quote called the Eisenhower matrix. And all it does is say we have two decisions to make about any given task. How important is it, and how urgent is it? The Eisenhower matrix has 4 squares representing all possible combinations of urgent and important, along with some guidance about what to do for items that fall into that specific category. Items that are urgent but not important have to be done right away. But we should take steps to minimize the items on that list, like don't let things get up to their deadline so quickly. Anything that's important but not urgent should be your priority over anything else that's less important, because these tasks bring the greatest reward or value to us when they're done. If something's not important but it is urgent, try and find a way to delegate or automate these. They're usually someone else's problem anyways. As a matter of fact, a good rule of thumb is that urgency is usually driven by someone else's deadlines, whereas importance is driven by our own goals. And the last category are things that aren't urgent and they're also not important. Experts will say that you're supposed to eliminate things in this category, but I find that they definitely have a place when you don't need to be productive or you're just trying to unwind. So for me, I just try to move these outside of the hours where I'm trying to be productive and get things done. But back to priority. You don't have to create a literal matrix every time that you have a to-do list and you have to try to figure out what to do. But it's worth asking the questions every single time about, like, am I spending my energy on the things that really deliver the greatest return on that investment? Do what matters most as soon as you can. It turns out that by focusing on our big, important tasks first in a day actually gives us more capacity to fit those smaller, more urgent items in later on. The point isn't to avoid anything that isn't urgent, it's to structure your energy and your day around the big important tasks first before moving on to the lesser tasks. If we focus on those lesser tasks first, we'll be completely wiped out before we have a chance to do any meaningful work. And that's why it's so important to strategically prioritize your day so that you can get more things done with the same level of energy in a given day. Some people call this eating the frog. If you had to eat a frog, if that was one of your tasks, if you don't do that first thing in the day, you're going to be thinking about it all day. So it's better to just get that over with and done right away in the morning when you're fresh and ready to go than to dread that thing all day and have it sap your energy. And not to mention, by the time you get to that, you've already done so much that you're draining the gas tank to get that kind of thing done. I want to wrap up by sharing a famous exercise that talks about this prioritization concept. If you imagine that in this hand, we have 3 big rocks. These are the important tasks, the meaningful work, your goals, like getting these things done, really drive you forward. And in this hand, we have a pound of sand, and we're trying to fit it into one glass jar. If we put all the sand in, the whole pound at once, and do all those small tasks first, and then try to fit those big rocks in, we won't have enough room. You can try it for yourself at home. You literally will not be able to fit the 3 rocks in. But if you start with this empty jar, you put your 3 rocks in first, then you can fit that sand in all around and everything fits in that one jar. That jar is your day. And so by focusing on the big stuff first, you'll have the energy to work on those smaller, lesser tasks. You can definitely find a video of someone doing this on YouTube. I'll put a link below to one that I found. Anyways, that's all I have. I hope something in this was helpful or useful or insightful. Thank you for watching my video, and I will see you in the next one.